Welcome to Media Makers Spotlight from Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. We bring you conversations with industry professionals for behind the screens, insight, and inspiration.
Welcome to Media Maker Spotlight. I'm your host, Sandra Abrams. And before I introduce my guests, I want you, the audience, to ask yourself, how would you feel if you discovered your brother spied on you and shared that information with the secret police, known in East Germany as the Stasi? That real-life situation happened to Peter Keup, a victim of the Stasi, its surveillance program, and he spent 10 months in jail. His experience is the subject of The Spies Among Us. The award-winning feature documentary is by my guests, journalists and filmmakers, Jamie Coughlin Silverman and Gabriel Silverman. They chronicled Peter's journey in coming to grips with family betrayal after reading his secret file and how he confronts members of the secret police in rare interviews. They are the co-founders of SideXSide Studios, a global company that produces original films, live experiences, and brand content. Welcome, Jamie and Gabe, and congratulations on all the success of the film. And a special salute to you, Jamie. I understand this is your directorial debut with this film.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a cool thing to get to experience for the first time, that's for sure. Having been on the producing and writing side for most of my career.
Well, I went to DC Doc's Film Festival last year. I had heard about your connection to RIAS, which stands for Radio in the American Sector. And I had been the recipient of that German-American fellowship. And I did it in 2002. Now, at that time, we did speak to somebody who had saw their file, the Stasi file, and they had explained that to us. So, and then you were recipients of that fellowship, and you went to Germany, and you also heard someone's experience now. So when did you go on the RIAS trip and to Germany on that journalism exchange program? And when did you meet Peter?
Yeah. So thanks again for having us. We went on that in 2013. At the time, I was working for the Washington Post as a video journalist, and Jamie was working for USA Today. And it was an incredible opportunity for many reasons. My family history is very much intertwined with World War II history. And so I think when we went there, it was our first time in Germany, and our focus was really on that period of history. Because frankly, in America, I'm 40, I'm going to be 43 soon. The education around what happened behind the Iron Curtain is sorely lacking in our education system. And so I think what most Americans learned growing up in my generation was that there was a wall, Reagan said to tear it down, and then David Hasselhoff danced on it, right? So I think going to Berlin, which is such a dynamic, incredible city that wears its history on its sleeve, it's the East-West divide is to this day quite apparent. It's visceral. When we went to Hohenhausen, the secret Stasi prison, they had 17, the one in Berlin. We spoke with a different victim. His name was Gilbert Furian. But the idea for the files really was sparked by a woman named Hildegard, who was the chief of staff for one of the last mayors of West Berlin. And she mentioned offhandedly, yeah, I've got a file, but I never thought I'd ever want to look into it. I don't really want to know what's in there.
She didn't want to know. Huh, that's interesting.
Most Germans have not opened their file. Or have not
files have opened.
And I think that's an interesting question for the audience is if you have a file in front of you that is in some versions a retelling of your story from outside perspectives, and will give you clues on who may have betrayed your confidence to the government, would you want to open it? Because a lot of Germans have found out when they open up their files, foundational relationships in their life were the ones who spied on them or their family. That could be as close as your brother, uncle, best friend, neighbor, colleague. It's truly an act of paranoia. And that was just a fascinating place for us to start the endeavors. We were not in a position to make a feature film about this until 2019. And that's when we met Peter. there was a list of these, what we call contemporary witnesses. And we interviewed several. And then when we got to Peter, it was just clear he was the one. He fit a lot of different criteria. We want to make this film accessible to younger Germans and American audiences and Western audiences. So we wanted someone who could speak English and communicate in English emotionally and effectively. He tick that box. We wanted someone who would be willing to confront the truths of their own file. And the
That's
reality,
tough. That's emotional.
That's emotional. And, and you have to be vulnerable for that. And there's a bravery in that vulnerability. And then the last part of that, the criteria for us was, are they going on a natural investigation themselves? We didn't want to drag somebody into something that they didn't want to do. And also because of how complicated it is to request and receive your files, which can take years, we wanted somebody who had already opened their files and was already on a personal mission that we can speak to. And Peter, he opened his file in 2012. He wasn't really starting to investigate this part of his life, or wasn't in a position to until about the time we met him, because he was finishing up his doctoral thesis in history.
He was just starting it.
Yeah.
He was just on the beginning of his own process. He had just started his doctoral degree a few months before. And when we met, it's like you have love at first sight. Who is, it was just clear that we were going to be in each other's lives and that he was going to be an important person to us. And I'll say another important thing is he was willing to meet these Stasi officers on camera. These two sides do not talk in society. You can look at East and West. The divide is stark still in voting patterns, in people's support for Ukraine or Russia because of how they grew up. It's just still a divide that's sitting there in Germany because it was never dealt with. There was never any, the Stasi spied on people, but they also physically hurt people, especially earlier on in the regime. They used a technique that we talk about in our film called Zersetzung. And that was basically a way of emotionally manipulating people into submission. And they studied it with surgical, tactical skill and utilized it. And so, nobody wants to go, very few people want to go talk to the people who did this to them. There were something like 200,000 political prisoners in Germany. And being a political prisoner is as simple as you listen to the wrong radio station because you intercept the signal from West Berlin. That could make you a political prisoner. You talk about, wanting to live on the other side, wanting to experience something different. It was thought criminalized people in East Germany. And the people who perpetrated this surveillance system and these, what we would call in America, in a democracy, they lived in a dictatorship, crimes, just were never prosecuted, and they live amongst each other, mostly in the eastern part of the country, which is about a third of the country. And so to find somebody like Peter, who has the bravery and the true interest himself as a historian, to do something pretty unprecedented and special, and as a victim, confront the people who ran this system, and we thought was just incredibly unique and special. And once we met the antagonist, I would say, of our film, potentially, Major General Engelhardt, it became clear that was going to be a main theme of this film, is the meeting of these two sides and how do people view their own history and their own truth today with the separation of a few decades.
Right. Well, getting people to speak, that I thought was incredible. And I want to just quote something that you had said in your director's statement, Jamie. You said, as Americans, we find ourselves in a unique position with access to 3 former high-ranking officers. And we're seen as outsiders who weren't approaching the topic with preconceived notions, because I thought this Major General Engelhardt, he's the last surviving leader of the Stasi. He accepted no blame, had no regrets, and he admitted, things were excessive. So did you set that meeting up? Did that something that Peter did? And what was that like in the room? When you went to go film that, were you concerned that filming may not work out? We've set up all these cameras and lighting. What was going on there?
Oh man, to go back, that has to be like one of the most nervous moments I was ever before a shoot. So Engelhardt, Major General Engelhardt had written a book called Der letzte Mann, The Last Man. And it's his autobiography of being the last man standing in the Stasi as the protesters are, breaking down the doors of the building. And
as you see in the film, I think.
As you see in the film, essentially
right.
ending the Stasi's rule. And I got this book and I thought, well, this is fascinating that he clearly wants somebody to hear him. He wants somebody to hear his story. It was published only in the East in a very small, East German publishing house. And I reached out to the publicist and I asked if he would maybe be interested in speaking to an American filmmaker and journalist about his experience. And he immediately said yes, which was really surprising to me because he hasn't been interviewed on camera or really at all since 1990. It's been a very long time. Mm-hmm. He spoke right after the fall of Der Spiegel, and that he says didn't go well for him, and that we showed a piece of that. But that's the last time he was interviewed, and so I did not expect that. And he told us very frankly that he would not have spoken to, and does not speak to German journalists. He feels like the story is written, that the Stasi are the bad guys, and that no one's interested in hearing his side. And I said, I would like to hear your side. Now, it was a tough moment for me because I realized I really need to get good at German to be able to interview this man really well.
Okay. Right.
And
I was going to say, you have excellent, you have the Edward R. Murrow Investigative Journalism Award. You have these Emmy nominations for the both of you. I was going to say, you have all this experience. So why were you nervous?
Because most people who grew up in the East speak German and Russian. They don't speak much or understand too much English, although I think Engelhardt probably knows more than he lets on. And so I didn't speak German before I started making this film, and I started learning with the express purpose of being able to interview him. And so in the beginning, we set this interview, didn't have a pre-interview or speak beforehand. It happened really quickly. And we asked Peter if he would do the interview.
Well, when we brought this opportunity, I think he was interested. We never, I think at that point, expected him to even want to talk. We had conceived of it originally as more like a wild, wild country setup where you have one side telling one story, another telling another story. And then it's in their conflict of their retelling that there's all this interest. And when Peter actually said, I would like to talk to him, we considered it. And, at the Washington Post, I had done a couple of projects where you take yourself out of the situation as a journalist.
That was one of my questions because, normally you do the pre-interview or pre-production and you figure everything out and you take yourself out.
Exactly. And I think with this situation, we basically said to Peter, look, you're a historian. Everybody has multi dimensions to their story and their personality. You do not need to reveal yourself. Like should not be feeling forced to say that you were a victim of Stasi to Engelhardt. And the conversation lasted about 2.5 hours. There's clearly tension in the room. Peter, as you see in the film, is very nervous. There's a re-traumatization, or there's still this power dynamic that exists between people who were within the system versus people who were the focus of the system. And, to Engelhardt's credit, when he found out that Peter was doing the interview, he didn't leave. He sat down. The conversation lasted about 2.5 hours. And it was about halfway through that an exchange triggered Peter to share his side of the story. And to Engelhardt's credit, he didn't leave. He stayed and he engaged. And, at the end of it, they shake hands. And that started actually the filming relationship with Engelhardt. So like every other scene that you see in the film is almost chronological. Everything that we filmed with him happened after that first interview when he knew that Peter was part of the production. And then they wanted to continue the conversation, at various points of the 6 years of making the film.
Peter wanted to continue the conversation.
Well, Engelhardt
agreed and he showed up,
So it took you about 6 years to put this film together. With the documentary, you don't know how they're going to go. So, but yet when you're doing a news story, you're going, okay, I've got my minute 30 package to do. I've got this soundbite. I've got this B-roll. What were your, production meetings like? And also, like, did you get certain equipment that maybe you would not have done if you went when you were a journalist? Like, what was that like for you moving into that as the filmmaker?
Sure. Yeah, the transition from journalism to documentaries is a bigger gap than I think most people realize, because documentary is a different economic ecosystem. And I think when people are looking for a product in that world, it's a different set of considerations than in journalism. So what is our production meetings like? I mean, the production meetings are Jamie and I. We're married. We run a company together. We've got 2 kids together, which is another reason it took 6 years. So our production meetings are breakfast. Our production meetings are in bed talking about what happened that day. Our production meetings are driving, after dropping the kids off at school. Like our production meetings are pretty constant. So I would say it's a pretty non-traditional production meeting, which makes it, I think it's a blessing to have a really strong creative partnership. And it's also a curse because it's like you talk about.
Right.
So like, my sons who are our sons, I didn't birth them. Jamie did all the work, but our sons, like our oldest one is so fascinating because he's been alive as long as we've been making the film. And he asked us probing questions about the secret police and the Stasi. And he loves Paw Patrol. And he's trying to reconcile, well, why is there, he knows Peter. And he's like, why is the police putting Peter in jail? But Paw Patrol, the police, it's good. So it's, our production meetings are pretty consistent all the time. In terms of special equipment, I think that this is actually, an important lesson in really considering how you make a film. There's a trend during what we'll call the quote unquote golden years of documentary when, all these streamers came online and they were competing for, the highest bidder for new films that were breaking ground. And there was this idea about, a cinematic polish to it that you needed, right? Like, you think about the start of great documentarians like Joe Berlinger. Like, this is like, you pick up a cam and you go down to Arkansas and you film. It doesn't matter. You just film. It's not about perfect lighting. It's about perfect moment. And, so I think initially when we started, like you can see it with Gierke, the psychology professor in the Stasi's secret university, that was a larger crew that we started. It was an earlier interview we did. We had, a really like strong lighting setup, and we had, multiple cameras, and we had a bigger crew. And what we kind of realized as the story started to merge with Peter and the Stasi kind of starting to meet each other, we kind of realized 2 things. One is that if this were to feel overproduced, it would remove the sense of genuine veneer, or it would create distance between genuine moments. And the other thing is, like Jamie said at the top of the program, and this is true, I think that a lot of Stasi officers felt more comfortable talking in front of us than a lot of German crew. So we ended up deciding, okay, it's going to be the slimmest crews possible. So most of the film was me and Jamie and a camera. And then whenever we needed sound, we've got an amazing sound guy. His name is Thomas Funk from he was raised in East Germany. And we really try to keep it small. That intimacy was more important than anything else. So in terms of any special equipment, no, I mean, like I have a fancier camera than I did when I was at the Washington Post, but I wouldn't say anything like bought specific. I will say one thing, actually, this didn't really make a ton of it in the film. We ended up buying a very light, we shot most of it with FX9, Sony FX9. And then we bought an FX3, which was like a handheld version of this, because we were trying to keep a low profile when we walked around town with Engelhardt. I think if we had a big production and people started like really looking at who he was, maybe it would be a different relationship. So he ended up giving us like a 3 or 4 hour walking tour of Berlin that we only used about 30 seconds of. And that was only possible because I had a handheld camera rather than a massive rig. Because, Engelhardt, to his credit, he is in shape.
He's walking fast.
He's like a very fast walking, at that time, 74-year-old or 75-year-old. So, yeah, he walks circles around me at least.
I was going to say that is incredible. Yes. Well, one of the scenes I was thinking of in particular was Peter was in the prison room where he has been held a prisoner. I think in 1981, he tried to escape. He only told his mother. And then he was arrested and strip searched and put in this prison. And there is that scene where he's in that prison. And I was thinking, how did you guys decide to do that? It just felt like very intimate to me and very emotional. And I thought that was so, awesome. But again, what you said about a small crew, I think that sounds like how it went.
It's interesting because a lot of these places are not, they're not necessarily well-funded. Some are more well-funded than others. And the prison that you're talking about, there's a couple prisons that we filmed in, we call the remand prison, where all the interrogation is happening, and we'll call it, they arrest first, find facts later is how they operated. And so, they knew that he arrested, but like, who tried to help him? Was this premeditated? And he was kept in this, Dresden prison for 3 months without ever knowing that he was in prison or told he was in prison or where he was. He was driven around. He was captured at a train station, then driven around for hours. So he didn't know if he was even in the country. It turns out he was about 20 minutes from his house, but he had no idea. And his family didn't know where he was for 3 months. And so, that prison holds a lot of significance for his, I'm going to use the word trauma. I'm not sure he uses the same word in the same way because he doesn't talk about it in those terms. But so we went there, several times with him, once by himself. And then the remarkable thing that you couldn't predict was that then Gierke, the psychology professor, and him started to form like a real, relationship. It's not, I wouldn't say friendship, but a relationship, an exchange, relationship. And, he asked for a tour through Peter's eyes of this prison because he had never allegedly been to one, since the fall of the wall. And so we had this last minute opportunity to film with Peter in this prison. And it was one of those situations where like we had just gotten back from a production trip. We were tired. I was
35 weeks pregnant.
Jamie was 35 weeks pregnant.
Oh, and you're pregnant at the same time while all of this is happening.
I was pregnant throughout this entire production, basically.
Right. That's a story right in and of itself. Pregnant women directing their first film. What are your tips?
Good shoes.
But it was one of those things that we got home and then I had to, Jamie couldn't by definition travel again. So I had to go back by myself with a sound guy. And the whole time we're just thinking please don't come early, the baby. Please don't come early. Please don't come early. And so it was a very fast trip back to capture this once in a lifetime opportunity.
But you took advantage of it and you did it. I kind of want to talk about something that you had said, Jamie, again, going back to your directorial statement. You talked about the rise of the modern day surveillance system, that the Stasi was the system they had and how they used informants and pressured people. But I'm thinking of what's happening here in our country. Recently, the AG had a book in front of her at the House committee, Google searches that the Congress people had done, the taking of the Georgia voter rolls. No matter the sophistication of the system, you said, they're all collecting the same type of data, prized by the Stasi. Are people coming to you and saying, I see the connection? Is it elevating your film? What are you hearing anything different, considering what's happening now?
Yeah, one of my favorite lines in the film is at the very end. Peter and Engelhart meet again after many years. And Peter's asking him about the surveillance system. And Engelhart says, look, if you had the capabilities of today, it would be a paradise for us. And I think that says it all. We're all willingly participating in the surveillance state that we live in right now, every day. And I'm not suggesting that we don't carry around cell phones that track all of our data and, sell them to the highest bidder. But I am suggesting that we need regulation on this. Europe is farther along than us because I think in some ways they've had major economies there have experiences with surveillance states, including Germany and Poland. You want to talk about audiences and how they react. Our international premiere for the film is at the Warsaw International Film Festival. Speaking of Poland. And, every audience reacts differently to a film like this. We screened the film in Palo Alto and everybody wants to talk about tech, but also there were a couple of Chinese immigrants there who wanted to talk about how this is the state they lived in now. This is current day China, Screening it in South by, again, a big tech city in Austin, people really laughed at all of the deep cut tech references in the film. Screening it in Warsaw, the room was dead silent throughout the entire film. Not a sound. And at the end, you know, they certainly get the today references, but they wanted to talk about how their own society is not dealing with this at all. And one of the main themes that we wanted people to see and understand is how the information bubbles that we live in on the internet today, how they're tearing us apart, how they are endangering our democracies, how they are making people really think that they don't actually have to engage in the kind of democracy that Peter and Engelhardt and Gierke and wrote that all of these guys are engaging in, to their credits, which is reaching across the aisle and looking somebody in the face that you really don't agree with, and trying to find a common narrative, trying to find some kind of common ground with which to work together, because without that, our democracy cannot function. And so this is a roundabout way of, I guess, talking about the themes of the film, but Gabe and I made this film with the feeling overall that it's a pro-democracy film. And that's what we want people to take away from it.
We had a premiere in Berlin at the Zoopalast, which is this beautiful theater in the heart of Berlin. And we had 2 sold-out theaters and a really long Q&A where Peter and Gierke were on stage together answering questions, which was quite a big deal in the German press. But what was fascinating was that I'd say about a third of the discussion was around ICE, was around Minneapolis, because, you know, maybe we are in a situation where it's incremental change, and then you get to a place where like, oh, I don't like, this is not what most Americans want, is like masked guys snatching, you know, people from schools, you know, and traumatizing children, and, you know, getting into physical altercations and even shooting people. That was very resonant with the German audience in the context of this film. They make the connections very easily because of their lived experience. And I think that the basis is that we interviewed so many people that did not make it in the film. And one of them was Diepgen, the last mayor of West Berlin. And he just said the most simple and poignant line, which is, you cannot live without trust in your neighbor. And that's true. You can't live without trust in your neighbor or live without trust in your family. And when you have a government setting up opportunities for you to call out your, you know, inform on your neighbors about things that you might just disagree with, that sets up a paranoia in a society that is not sustainable. You know, there's an article, I guess it was in the Post today, about there's a prankster, you know, a comedian who set up a fake tip line for people to call in to report somebody they think might be an illegal immigrant or an undocumented immigrant in our country. And that thankfully isn't real, but he gets over 100 calls on this, and you start to see how people are so willing to do that. I mean, you saw a lot of these things, you know, with anti-abortion laws, where they're trying to use, you can report somebody, whether you have a connection to them or not. These type of dynamics that is a top-down setup is a very dangerous precedent for democracy. And it extends to many aspects of our life. You know, like one of the hallmarks of East German culture was self-censorship. Once the culture realized that there's things you say in private and there's things you say in public, you self-censor. And that curbs expression, that it curbs relationships or trust. And are we doing that now with how we, you know, fear backlash online about what we say? Like, there's a lot of things that, you know, there's not a one-to-one analogy. I think that would be a disrespect to East Germans to say that we are living an exact parallel experience, but there's certainly lessons that we can learn and apply to our modern world, so we try to avoid the worst of what may be coming.
But Jamie, you mentioned your film's pro-democracy. Tell us, have you been able to get distribution for this film?
Not yet. It's rough out there.
I would say that we knew from the beginning that this was a challenging film to distribute.
Yeah.
You know, it is a German story, half of which has subtitles. And on the flip side, in German culture, for the older audience, it's weird to see a German speaking English about a German topic. Now, the film is living a dual reality where we're winning all these awards inside Germany. Like when we had our premiere, the media went crazy. We had articles in every single, major publication and every single cultural, TV program and podcast. The response was significant. But, we're also living in an age where we have mergers and acquisitions. Nobody wants to do anything political. You have the head of the Berlinale coming out and saying that we should not be wading into politics, which to me in film and culture and art is wild to say that. Definitionally, that is what we do in moments of political uncertainty or lack of clarity. And to suppress that artistic instinct is to undermine the entire craft. So we are living in this very strange space. We have some distribution offers from some, let's say, non-traditional distributors, but the hope of getting a all rights deal is not, I don't think, in the future of the film.
Well, the film is The Spies Among Us. It follows Peter Keup, who was the victim of the East German secret police, his journey to his own past, and how he confronts members of the authoritarian surveillance system. It's from SideXSide Studios. And I think you have the Cleveland International Film Festival is coming up. So you have that. And tell us, where can people learn more about the film?
So I think the best thing to follow the film is the spiesamongus.film is the website. That's where we have a sign-up sheet. We're looking at alternate distribution, so they can sign up to follow along. There's also all of our updated screening. And so you can follow the spiesamongus.film or our company's website, which is SideXSideStudios.com, SideXSide Studios, but SideXSideStudios.com.
Well, thank you, Jamie and Gabe, for joining Media Maker Spotlight. And we look forward to learning and hearing more about your film in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks for listening to Media Maker Spotlight from Women in Film and Video. To learn more about WIF, visit F as in Frank, V as in Victor.org. This podcast is created by Sandra Abrams, Candace Block, Brandon Ferry, Tara Jabari, and Jerry Reinhardt, and edited by Michelle Kim, with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio and Ed Saltzman. Subscribe to continue learning from more amazing media makers. Please visit MediaMakersSpotlight.com for more information.